Hello and welcome to the Keystone Kickoff Show. I am Jim Galanti. I am with T. Frank Carr. T. Frank, we are fully into training camp now, media day the other day. It's football season, my friend.
Yes, it is. And I love the fact that so far the weather has realized that. It has been cool. It's been stormy. It has been fall-like since the start of August. I love that. It's all the feelings are coming together and it's making you, I mean, for me, I've been ready to run through a brick wall since the 1st of August. So, you got any brick walls for me, Jim?
None that I want to have come down, T. Frank. However, when I do, I will reach out to you to take care of that. Let's
Perfect.
move on to actual football talk, though. As much as I want to talk media day and everything that went on there, this conference realignment stuff will not end.
Yeah.
And credit this for essentially the implosion of the Pac 12 before USC and UCLA could suit up for a Big Ten game. Guess what? We get two more teams, Oregon and Washington, joining the conference. What's your take?
Well, I go back all the way to, I believe it was when Texas bolted for the SEC. And the ACC, the Big Ten, and the Pac-12 all signed an agreement. The alliance is what they called it. I called it the League of Extraordinary Pinky Promises because there was absolutely no way. There was nothing binding about their agreement to say, hey, we're going to maintain the college football order. And then, like, less than a year later, the Big Ten goes Game of Thrones and stabs the Pac-12 in the back and takes away UCLA and USC. So this has been in the work for a while. Like, if you go back to right after that happened, where USC becomes a Big Ten school, there were rumors that the Big Ten was also interested in the other Pac-12 schools that we hear now. But Kevin Warren left as the commissioner. So there was kind of this power vacuum for a little bit where the Big Ten didn't have a leader for a couple of months. Now Tony Petitti, he's been officially introduced to Big Ten Media Day. Things are up and running. And it just kind of feels like they took a break in the middle of what this was going to be their plan all along. So not surprising, but it's always surprising when this stuff happens. Like, even if you predict it to happen, the traditions of college football, which is what college football is built around, it's the separating factor for it. Those are, coming tumbling down. And I know that, fans can feel bad about it. And they can feel, I guess, put out or betrayed at a certain point in this process. And I think that's fair. But this is kind of the logical destination of college football, as consolidating of power and the structures that we're going to get two super conferences. It's going to go to a professional type model, I think. And we're going to see something similar to what we see in the NFL, maybe with different quirks about it. But we've been going this way for a very long time. And it's just, this is accelerated since 2019, I guess.
What I think would be really ironic is if we eventually get there, as you said, the super conferences, kind of like the NFL, where they start to split things up geographically, and we end up where we started, where there's the Pacific Division of the Big Ten, which is all the leftover Pac-12 teams who are now officially part of the Big Ten, and they'll break them up geographically. Now, T. Frank, what happened, though, as you said, USC, UCLA comes into the Big Ten, and some of the other Pac-12 teams are left hanging. But they pretty much were left hanging there until it became pretty obvious the Pac-12 was not going to get a television contract that satisfied their members.
Yeah.
So does that, in the end, is this really just like it always is? It's about television money driving these changes.
Absolutely. That's why USC left. This goes back to the last Pac-12 commissioner who couldn't secure a Pac-12 network deal for the television stations out west, and that failure to create that revenue and to create that environment for growth for the member institutions is what led to all of this. And the Big Ten and the SEC, they are leaders in what's going on right now. The ACC, I think they have a problem that their rights are locked in for so long. And the buyout, as we've talked about with Clemson and Florida State, the rumors around them wanting to leave for the Big Ten as well. That's what's keeping the ACC in this. But with the rest of the schools in the Pac-12 going to the Big 12, now we've consolidated down to 4 conferences essentially, because there is no Pac-12 network to speak of. And when you're negotiating with Apple and it's going to be behind a paywall and you're going to be, you're paid, and this was the plan, you're paid on the number of streamers watching games. So like the actual viewership is going to drive revenue in this situation. That is not a sustainable model for the school. And that is, again, going to put these schools and these institutions behind every other school in terms of revenue, which is resources, which is everything else. And that's why I think you see it's pretty clear why everyone that left the Pac-12 left the Pac-12. And we'll see what happens after that. We might have more stability now than we have for a little bit, but maybe just for 2 years. Once the college football playoff expands to 12, and then for 2 more years, then the deal is over, and we don't know what comes after that. So all of these moves and things that are happening, they're happening in short order, and then more change is coming after that.
Okay, T. Frank, it's obvious the schools out west, Pac-12 collapsing. It's a financial move that they pretty much have to make. How about from the Big Ten side? Adding USC and UCLA, you had USC, the national brand name. You also have both those teams in the LA market. Obvious, that's why they want them. It makes sense for the Big Ten to bring them in. But how about Oregon and Washington? Does that make sense financially for the Big Ten?
So this is where I'm personally a little bit murky. I haven't done as much research or haven't listened to enough experts talk about the Big Ten media deal. I know that there was some sort of shortfall with the Big Ten media deal and what they agreed to and what they could deliver to their TV partners. So yeah, it'll lower the payout for each school, but was that artificially high to begin with? And I shouldn't speculate too far because there's probably the answer out there and it's obvious, and I just haven't gotten to it yet. But I think the main thing here is that the plan is changing. I think we've talked about with these expansions of conferences. We're talking about media markets. We're talking about capturing states and putting your television channel on all of these states, their DirecTVs, their dishes, their everything in that market. I think it's now switching to just world domination. So it doesn't really matter at this point if you're getting it. You want to establish and you want to get the highest quality brand that brings you both. But I do think that the way this is going, it does open up the door for a Notre Dame to join the Big Ten, because at a certain point, it's going to just be, we've tipped past where it's a strategic divvying up of markets, and it's now just get as many of the big names as you can. And, oh, by the way, target big markets, because that's the best of both worlds. So, Washington and Oregon, those are new markets for the Big Ten, obviously. So now that they have the West Coast in general. And Oregon, obviously a major brand in college football. So all of those things make sense. Who is next? Because I don't think this is over. That's what I'm going to be interested in. Who's the next to fall? Feels like the ACC avoided a catastrophe here, but we'll see how long they can avoid that catastrophe. And then what happens to the Big 12? Like, do they have enough schools that are of quality enough to compete in a playoff world that's going to be dictated by the Big Ten and the SEC? So these conferences and who throws their weight around is going to be a lot about the future of college football.
And I believe you're also referencing, when you talk about fulfilling the contract, NBC has the evening contract. Big Ten has an issue with November games.
Yeah.
Here in the Midwest or in Pennsylvania in November, the cold weather and all, you'll have more opportunities with West Coast teams to fulfill that obligation. I'm still also wondering if there'll be a new contract for that late night time slot.
You mean
Big
the
Ten
Big
is
Ten
locked
After
in.
Dark?
That's what I'm talking about, Big Ten
Yeah.
After Dark, where, if the West Coast schools, you might not have that much interest on the East Coast or the Midwest, but all of a sudden, and it doesn't have to be the very top end games, Oregon, Ohio State, but
Yeah.
if you have Wisconsin versus Washington and you play it, 7:30 on the West Coast, but 10:30 here in the East, will that get a television audience? I think it will.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that's part of it. Plus, just the fact adding 2 more teams, it adds inventory. So, Frank, with the last couple minutes we have left, I want to ask actually a football question.
Whew.
What
All
happens
right.
now competitively, in the Big Ten? I think we just managed to, wrap our heads around USC and UCLA coming in, with USC probably being a premier program. What does Oregon and Washington do to the competition in the Big Ten?
I mean, this is an interesting question because we frame everything in terms of how do you get to the playoff, right? So you can't lose, but that's ending this year. So this year, nothing. Next year, it expands to 12 teams. So it lowers the opportunity for, I guess, overall, and any one individual team getting to the college football playoff when it expands to 12, but also it ups the odds for the Big Ten to get more teams in because they have more quality teams. That's something that I don't really know. So if you talk about Penn State specifically, I don't know that this has a huge impact on Penn State because they're already in one of the toughest divisions in football. So honestly, 2024, we've all looked at the schedule and people say, wow, that schedule is way easier than what they've been locked into for the last 7, 8, 9, 10 years. How it is adjusted going forward, we don't know how they plan to schedule. We don't know if they're going to do pods, how they're going to go in general with non-conference versus conference games, and what's the plan outside of 24. We've looked ahead basically 1 year, but we don't know, is Penn State going to play Oregon every 4 years at this point? And then does it really matter? So I think for the most part, to sum this up from recruiting to competition, things are going to get a little bit easier on the competition side initially, and then it'll largely stay the same. I genuinely think things will stay the same for Penn State in terms of what they are facing in the Big Ten.
Very good, T. Frank. That's it for quarter number 1. Stick around. Quarter 2, I'm going to start asking T. Frank about Media Day. Stay tuned for that. Hello and welcome back to the Keystone Kickoff Show. It is quarter number 2. He's T. Frank. I'm Jim. T. Frank, we spent the first segment talking about more conference realignment, the addition of Oregon and Washington. Now let's turn our attention to Penn State specifically. Penn State held the Media Day a few days ago. You were there. First of all, just could you give us the overview? What is it like on Media Day to be there?
Yeah, it's I said this the other day. It's got big first day of school vibes. Everyone's showing up in their new kicks, got their new shirt. Everyone looking clean. Everyone's excited, talking to each other. A very crowded day.
Are you talking about the players or the media?
Oh, the media. No, the media. Yeah, everyone just walking into the room for the first time in a while. And it's not like it's the first time in a while because Penn State does a great job of providing access, truthfully. And they've added some over the last couple of years of talking to us in June and Lift for Life and different things where you can go and talk to people and players and different opportunities. But it's different being in the media room where it's like there's that buzz of this is the season has started. And, I was talking to some people there yesterday, and some of the other members of the media were like, that not as many people as I expected. And, I'm sitting in the back row with my camera, getting it ready to record James Franklin's press conference, put on our YouTube page. And I'm looking out and I'm like, there are people in every single row in the back, plus almost all the seats in the front were filled. So there is anticipation. There is excitement. There is people are interested in this team this year because of their potential and the idea that this is an offseason darling for the college football playoff team. So after that, it just becomes about, it's kind of like getting on a roller coaster And this is way too inside baseball sort of thing, where it's like when you're in the media and you're doing a bunch of different things, everything's happening quickly. So by the time that you are adjusted to like the speed of everything, you're sitting down for the media lunch and you're then waiting to go to practice. So it's a very long day and it's a very quick day all at the same time. But the energy and the excitement that fans feel, like that is a palpable thing in the media room on media day.
Well, let's talk about James Franklin's conversation with the media. Very early on, it appeared somebody within the media kind of baited James about uh, the expectations for this year's team. And James Franklin, he didn't fall for it, okay? He didn't
Yeah.
place those playoff expectations on this team. But what he did say instead was how much more depth this team has. And
Yeah.
again, he went on, and perhaps you could help us out with this. He talks in terms of being 2.5 deep.
Yeah. So I don't think that was a bait. And I know that that's what Franklin said at the podium. And I think he's a little bit kidding. You got to be careful whenever you say something. If there's an opinion baked into your question, James will say, I don't know that I'd put it the way you phrased it, or I don't. But he has said in so many words over the season how excited he is for this team because of those things. So it's a logical assumption for somebody to, and I would do this as well, a logical assumption for somebody to think this team has real chances. And that's also what we just talked about, of this excitement around Penn State. Everyone is saying they have a chance to get to college football playoff, but James Franklin will not say those words directly. And if he agrees with that, then it's basically like he has. So that particular question, talking about the depth and how he phrases it, is to say this is a really good team that has answers at a lot of positions and has the ability to weather injury storms, where, you know, in past games, you look at the Ohio State game, they were down to their fourth tackle, or their third tackle at that point, excuse me. And they got down at the end of the game to their fourth tackle. Neither of their starting tackles ended that game from the start of the season. So, you know, if you have depth and you are deep across the board, and James Franklin feels optimistic and positive about the progress of certain positions like defensive tackle, maybe less receiver, but he likes the numbers there from what it sounds like, then you feel confident that you have that too deep across the board to compete and to weather storms and to have competition to make some cream rise to the top. Somebody is going to break out because of that pressure cooker of intensity. So, like, all of those things wrapped up in that one answer are to say, yes, this team does have expectations and they do expect to be very good, but it's the difference of saying it out loud, of, you know, setting that goal from James Franklin and betraying his 1-0 mentality thing, and saying that we think we can win week in and week out. And that you know, they're kind of the same thing, but for Franklin, they're very different.
All right. Speaking of depth and weathering injuries, this wasn't James Franklin commenting on it, of course, but we found out that Smith Vilbert, defensive end, is out for the year. You always hate to hear that before the season even starts, but if there's a position that could weather it, it's probably defensive end.
Yeah, I mean, that's a position that James Franklin talked about going 2.5 deep. You got two starters, two backups that can play, and you feel maybe not interchangeable, but great about. And then Zariah Fisher has had a great camp so far and looked great in the spring game. Very active, very good coverage defender in space from that defensive end position, which, with as much zone blitzing as they do, that's an asset. So you've got 5 really good defensive ends, and then Smith Vilbert, you know, is going to be fighting for that 5th position with Zariah Fisher. And I know that a lot of fans, based on the bowl game 2 years ago, think that Smith Vilbert has a lot of talent and potential, but it's about not flashing and actually consistently putting it together. So, I mean, there's a reason he is not a part of the conversation when we talk about the top 4, despite being a veteran player and, you know, having the size and physicality and having good tools. You got to put it all together, and a lot of guys have at that position, and he was still fighting for, you know, positioning on the roster down in the 5-6 spots. So this is always a dance, right? This is a dance of saying, like, you don't want to disparage a player and you don't want to say like, oh, they'll be fine without him, because you never know. But at the same time, as you mentioned, they have a lot of talent at that position, and Smith was not where I think some fans expected him to be based on his performance in that one particular game. So that's kind of the long answer, and the kind of, we're beating around the bush on a lot of this stuff, but that's where we are with that position, where it's you never want to lose anybody, but as you said, if there's a position to do it, that would be the one, and it's in a position on the depth chart where you won't feel that impact week one.
Okay, T. Frank. I've always suspected that James Franklin listens to our segments with you. Okay, T. Frank. And now I've got further proof.
Yeah.
When he talked about the safety position, and he said the two deep might actually be better than last year, and they're losing Jair Brown. No one person would replace that production necessarily, but the several guys would do it. I think he was quoting your safety segment on Better or Worse.
So this is one of those things where I feel good, where things that I think and say independently of the coaching staff, when they then say it later, it's like, okay, so I'm not full of it. That's good to know. Like, that sort of imposter mentality sort of thing of like just a good check saying, okay, I am seeing this the right way. And yeah, that's the reality, is it's a talented position, but there's something about getting your hands on the football and having ball skills and being a ball hawk, for, to use a cliche term, that you can't just say you're going to replace. You can't just go, okay, yeah, we're going to get 10 interceptions over the last 2 years. We're going to get another 8 from somebody this year. That's just, you can't bank on that. So who are the guys that are going to step up and do that? And there's a lot of talent at the position, even going down into the freshman class, and the opportunity is there, but the veterans have to step up. It's not going to be all KJ Winston and Zakee Wheatley. This has to be a collective effort between the four of them to replicate what Jair Brown did, because again, going back to what he did, it was literally everything. I went through the prowler position week by week last year, and I looked at how it evolved over time with Abdul Carter being inserted in the lineup. And Tig Brown, basically, when there was a problem, he solved it for them. He played a ton of different positions. He played a ton of different coverages. And that versatility, I don't know that I see one guy on this roster that has obvious experience and talent to do that. Now, some of the guys have the talent to be better than Tig Brown, truthfully, but they've got to develop the skills and the intangibles and all those things to put that into practice. And that's the biggest unknown, kind of like a quarterback, of you can have all the talent in the world, but the innate ability to play and to produce, that's a big question mark.
Well, T. Frank, you would like to consider affirmation. I'd like to think of it as James Franklin just listening and learning from you.
Yeah, that's definitely it.
Let's move on. It was interesting also. James Franklin talked about Dante Cephas, the transfer wide receiver coming in. It's always interesting, isn't it, that adjustment a player has to make when making a transfer, and also a step up in conference competition.
Yeah, I'm getting a lot of the same vibes that we got from Mitchell Tinsley and the way James Franklin has talked about Cephas. So take that for what you will. The only difference is that Cephas was not here in January for these things for us to say, hey, how is Dante Cephas doing during spring practice? And James Franklin to say, yeah, he's getting better in the weight room, and he's getting bigger and stronger and faster. He's just had a truncated version of that coming during the, I think, spring or June. I apologize. I forget exactly when it was, but after spring camp. So those things still have to happen. He still has to get bigger and stronger and faster in the weight room. And as Franklin talked about, it's great to do it against Georgia in 1 week or Oklahoma in another, but like, you're facing that level of competition every single week, and you've got to adjust to that. And that's really what I've seen from him through 2 open practices so far. He's been one of the last scholarship players to go through the line at each position when they're going through individual periods, not when we're seeing the 2 deep and we're seeing the offenses running plays, but when we're going through the individual drills, he's sitting back watching and kind of getting the lay of the land. We'll have to see week and a half, 2 weeks into the 3-week training camp, if at some point he starts to push and he starts to be the guy that's now near the front of the line and he's being more aggressive during all of those things. So that has been just a preliminary understanding of Dante Cephas. He's not going to step in right away and be the number one guy at that Z position. He is going to work his way into that, and we're going to see where that gets him and the offense long term. He's going to be a part of the conversation. He's going to play, but starting out of the gate, maybe not. And that's, one of the things of not being here for spring ball that I think changed the plan from what it was when they recruited him to Penn State out of the portal.
And this is where fans have to understand that too and show a little bit of patience.
Yeah.
Game one, he may not be your leading receiver or may not even be the starter, but allow for that transition time.
It's not Madden.
Everything changes.
You're not plugging him right into a position and his skill numbers make him work. Like, this is a person that's got to learn.
Very good. All right, that is it for quarter number 2. T. Frank, stick around. Quarter 3, we're going to take your questions. Stay tuned for that.
Are you a company that is passionate about athletics and wants to tap into the Penn State sports community? Maybe you're a community organization in State College, Center County, Pennsylvania, or even planet Earth. Are you interested in growing your brand and leveraging our YouTube and podcast platform? Or are you just a person that has some money to spend? If you're any of those things, or something I didn't bring up just now, consider advertising on the Blue White Illustrated YouTube show. We have a dedicated and passionate audience that is just waiting to hear from you. Through me, talking about your business on the show. That's how we do it. So if that sounds like something you're interested in, email Michelle DeLee Hamilton at michelle@comanpub.com. That's michelle@comanpub.com. We're waiting to hear from you. Through me, talking about you. Again, that's how we do it.
Hello and welcome back to the Keystone Kickoff Show. It is quarter number 3. He's T. Frank. I'm Jim. It's time for Ask T. Frank. This is where we take your questions for T. Frank. He gives the great answers, as always. And at the end, he'll pick out the best question. They will win the 409tailgateclub.com prize. T. Frank, sir, are you ready?
Yes. One of these days, I'm going to say no, and it's going to throw the whole thing into a loop. But not today. I am once again prepared.
It will become a very short segment at that point, T. Frank.
Yeah.
So let's start with our friend Brad in Percy, since we talked about the conference realignment, adding Oregon and Washington. Brad asked, do you think the Big Ten will take a look at Clemson and Florida State? Also, are you disappointed Utah isn't going to be in the Big Ten? And I suspect he may have asked that question because of his final question, which is, lastly, how did you meet your wife if she went to Utah?
Yeah, so that one's easy. She moved out here to Pennsylvania 10 years ago, and we met at the gym. So just one of those, the stars align. She's a personal trainer. I was in desperate need of personal training. And, we started talking at the gym because I was terrible at lifting weights, even though I thought I knew what I was talking about and doing. As every 20-year-old aggro male of the gym thinks they know exactly what they're doing, lifting weights. She was just annoyed that I was doing it wrong and lifting way more weight than I was supposed to be able to do. So she's corrected my form since then. But the Utah not being in the Big Ten, I think it's a bit of a bummer because they're a better program than Washington right now. And I think institutionally, other than not having as many resources, look at the Pac-12. I think this should show you everything you need to know about the Pac-12 and their future in college football is that a program, and I mean this respectfully, a program on the level of Minnesota, somewhere between Minnesota and Iowa, was running the Pac-12 the last 2 years. They made it the Rose Bowl 2 years in a row. They are a really good, well-coached program. The coach is a little bit too old school for me, but he got a quarterback that he trusted, and they became more aggressive. They go for it on fourth down, and in big situations, they'll throw the ball more. They just need to get that institutional money essentially, and the Pac-12 dissolving. they're in the Big 12 now. So my in-laws are pretty frustrated. They were asking me if there's a way that I could backdoor them into the Big Ten, and I was like, listen, I'm just here along for the ride like the rest of you. But yeah, I think that it just goes to show you it's not about the quality of the program. It's about a bunch of other factors. What was the first question? Because I got derailed by all the other stuff.
Do you think the Big Ten will take a look at Clemson and Florida State?
Yeah. So if you've heard a rumor, and Brad, the reason you're asking is because you've heard the same rumors, you've seen the same headlines that I have. Yeah, of course they will. They probably already have, and they probably got halfway through it, and then the ACC's charter and the buyout were too big for it to make financial sense. So put a pin in it for now and see if your lawyers can find a way around it, because that's what I'm saying. Like the knives are out. So somebody is getting stabbed, and it looks like the ACC, they are the conference that is next on the list to devour because the Big 12's already been poached. And so the ACC, they got some valuable institutions and some valuable American continental real estate. Yeah, they're probably next.
All right. And just to add on to that, why not Utah? There are other elements, market size. It's why they're talking about Cal and Stanford before Utah. The other part of this is academic reputation. I know. It's still about, USC and UCLA aren't in because of their academics. It's the LA market and those things. But the Big Ten presidents, they still want to talk about academics.
Yeah.
I don't know where Utah stands academically, but I know they don't have the larger markets. That's part of it also. And by the way, I've always been fascinated by that academic standard. If you're using the same textbook and teaching the same things, if 2 + 2 = 4 at Harvard, it also is at Utah. You know what I mean? That's the actual content of what is being learned in those classes. A lot of that is about reputation. Let's go to Ryan in Woodlands, Texas, who says, can elite defensive ends like Denai Dennis Sutton make up for average play at the defensive tackle spot this year so we can compete with the Big Ten elites? Long term, we need elite Southeast Conference type defensive tackles to compete for titles, but maybe can scheme cover up for that this year?
First off, Ryan, glad to have you here. No, not in the overall sense of the word. Maybe from a pass rushing perspective, and that's something Deion Barnes talked about at Media Day. Is one thing he wants to see the D tackles do is win more one-on-ones, and that's in the run game and in the passing game where you're getting legitimate pressure from the interior. So yeah, I'm big on Denai Dennis Sutton as an interior pass rusher. I made the comparison to Manny Diaz, and I don't know that he loved answering the question of Greg Rousseau. 2019 had 16 sacks, and I believe 5 or 6 of them came on third down from a nose tackle position in the Prowler package. And Greg Rousseau, they call him Groot because he's got 36-inch arms. Powerful power rusher. Denai Dennis Sutton, 33, 34-inch arms, power rusher, size, strength, length. The comparison is there. So yeah, I think in certain situations you can, but you're not reducing him down in to play the run. The defensive tackles for Penn State still have to play the run, and you still have to use your base defense on rundowns because you've got to play real foot. And this is going to sound disparaging. You got to play real football. Like you do have to play standard alignments, and you can't just scheme your way around everything. At a certain point, it's 3rd and 4. You need your defensive tackles to hold their gaps and allow linebackers or somebody on the defensive line to get in the backfield and make a tackle so that you can get the defense off the field. You're not going to find ways to get guys into position. So there is some scheme that you can do, and there's some stuff that you can do, but I don't think you're putting Denai Dennis Sutton down there anytime outside of third down if he wins that competition and Zane Durant isn't the guy at nose tackle, because they've got good options there. It's just, again, that 1st and 2nd down. Do they have the defensive tackles to hold up in the 10 plays a game where they're going to be challenged by double teams and getting off the ball and all that stuff? And I think from the size and aggression standpoint, they do have the skills to make that happen.
All right, let's go to Mike in Harrisburg, who says, spending my Friday night taking in the news of two more teams joining the Big Ten and also realizing that blows up the 24 schedule. But if Penn State never joined the Big Ten, where do you think they would have been in terms of a conference from the early 90s when they entered the Big Ten to present day?
Oh, everyone knows that I am the historian here. Like, I should absolutely be answering questions about something that happened when I was 4.
You want me
You know,
to take this one, T. Frank?
Sure. I'll just go ACC, but I don't know. Like, you know, I do have some history perspective of like the Big East and you know, some of the conferences that Joe Paterno wanted to create and everything that didn't happen. Who knows? You know, like if all of that stuff happens, is there a rival to the Big Ten in the East? Because there isn't, and there hasn't been. But yeah, you take it away.
Well, understanding where things were at the timing, and it's kind of reversed. It was Penn State and Joe Paterno was looking to create an all East conference, an all sports Eastern conference.
Yeah.
And it's when that fell through, the Big Ten was actually plan B, not the other way around. And, you know, I think if you're going to do the conjecture thing, it maybe should have been, okay, what if that had formed? And you would have had, you know, the Syracuses, Rutgers, Pitt, Penn State, perhaps Maryland, which was more, you know, acclimated to the Mid-Atlantic Northeast than probably the ACC would join Boston College, and you'd have that kind of conference. I do think also when you mentioned, and by the way, the reason why that didn't happen was basketball.
Yeah.
Big East basketball was so big at the time that was the driving force, not football. You were going to say, T. Frank?
I was just going to say that you list those schools, and maybe the last 30 years, things change for a Syracuse and a Pitt if they're in a conference where it's, you know, you list those schools, and I think Penn State is lucky to be in the Big Ten. You know, for where we are now, if they were a part of a dying conference, they would be behind. They would be historically behind from a revenue and all of those perspective because they are not in the conference that is leading in realignment or is at least second in realignment. So, yeah, I don't think that it would have been a good thing for Penn State. They would have been in a precarious position.
Well, I think history would have totally changed. I don't know for the better, but the possibility was there also to go down the East Coast and pick up like Miami and Florida State.
Mm-hmm.
And it could have been a really, really good conference. If you, though, go Mike's premise and eliminate, say it didn't work out with the Big Ten, that they voted against it, would the ACC have come in? Now, remember, Florida State, Miami ended up as part of the ACC. So the ACC expanded not too long after that.
Yeah.
Would it not have been smart of the ACC to bring in Penn State? And had they, would you still have had the ACC collapse, or would it be, you know, with Penn State, Florida State, Pitt at the time was a better program, Clemson, Florida State, Miami, might it be a premier conference as opposed to now just hanging on by the grant of rights?
Yeah.
Okay, look, let's go to Sean in Brookville, who says, is this season make or break for Penn State's hopes of becoming a dominant force in the Big Ten? It seems like an increasingly difficult path as quality teams continue to be added to the conference. Are we running out of time?
Are we running out of time? No. Time. I'm not going to say time is infinite, but you know, there are plenty. They do this every year, and I wouldn't. Again, I don't look at Oregon as a demonstrably better team and institution than Penn State. The only thing they got going for them, I think that's an advantage, is they have Nike. They have the NIL backing, and they have a little bit more of that. But Penn State has been making some progress there. USC, that's an issue. Penn State probably the fourth best team in the Big Ten now, as opposed to the third best team in the Big Ten. But if Penn State fixes, Pat Kraft is very confident, very bullish on Penn State's future. He basically said, if we get out of our own way, the sky's the limit at Penn State. And I tend to agree, like with the national brand recognition that Penn State has, there's always going to be a section of like the sky is falling, but Penn State has great institutional stability with James Franklin being here for 10 years. They have been surging in recruiting to a consistent level. They just need the backing and support of the administration side to focus on these things and let it grow. And I think that they're in a position to do that now. So I don't think that you should be worried that they're going to take a slide in the middle of the Big Ten.
That is it for quarter number 3. Stick around, quarter 4. We're going to name our winner. Stay tuned. And welcome back to the Keystone Kickoff Show. He's T. Frank. I'm Jim. It's quarter number 4. T. Frank, we just finished up our Ask T. Frank segment. We need to name a winner. Who's it going to be?
We're going with Ryan in Woodland because he asked me something about football. Conference realignment is a snake eating its own tail. It's a circular conversation. We're not going to ever solve any of those things. So I felt more at home with Ryan's question over some of the other ones. I want to add on, just kind of tack on to Sean and Brookville here at the end, though, about Penn State and the danger of moving down in the Big Ten. Yes, it is a possibility if Penn State is not committed to being one of the top schools in college football. But that is the same argument you would have had 5 years ago. So as long as they're moving in that direction, I think that the institutional structure, the scaffolding to build something great is here. I was told, I had a family reunion over this weekend, and I was told that recruiting was going to take a big hit for Penn State and Wisconsin with the joining of these guys that have joined USC, UCLA, Washington, Oregon into the Big Ten. And then there was a question during recruiting, about recruiting during media day on Sunday about going into Oregon and recruiting. That's not how this works. Every school recruits regionally and then has a national target base of top players everywhere. So yes, USC came in and scooped up David Poly. That's not because they're in the Big Ten. That's because they're USC and they have the infrastructure to have a national brand. So Penn State's not going to Oregon outside of the select players like Vega Ioane to go get players because they're playing them once every 4 years now. They're going to recruit their traditional recruiting base, which, by the way, extends into Florida at this point with Jaywan Slider. Like, they're regularly getting guys out of Florida. So the recruiting, the only thing that's going to change is that USC, instead of being a Pac-12 school, is a Big Ten school. So Penn State will finish 4th in recruiting, but still be 10th overall in the nation. Like that, it's just reshuffling that. So as long as Penn State and James Franklin continue to do what they're doing, it's really not going to change their recruiting or their competition or their competence level, because every school has more competition now. You think Texas and Texas A&M and the SEC isn't making it harder? The only difference is those teams in the SEC have the 8-game conference schedule from before that has allowed them to get in the college football playoff, and also like just who they are, the Alabamas and the Georgias and their institutional programs of focusing on football and not having 31 schools and all the other stuff we talked about for years and years and years in the offseason. That's the difference here, is that, Penn State is now on, James Franklin talked about Pat Kraft, Neely Bandapudi, that they have alignment, that they want to be good at football, and they're going to back it up, essentially. So I think that it's just about competition, and it doesn't matter who's in the room. Penn State is among the teams that can compete. So don't get overly concerned by this, because everything's changing, and if your paradigm is still you can't lose any games to get to the college football playoff, that might be changing. It might be more NFL model where you can be 10-6 and get into the playoff in an NFL model, from the last 30 years. I don't know what it is now, 10-7, whatever.
Well, I do want to get back to the media days, but I have to comment because there's so much packed into this, T. Frank, is Penn State, as you pointed out, they were in a division with Michigan and Ohio State, who they had to play every single year to get to a 4-team playoff. Now, with a 12-team playoff, and if you look at it not to disparage UCLA and Washington, but you add USC and Oregon to the mix as contenders, that I still like that math when there's 12 playoff spots,
Yeah.
I like the math better that
Yeah.
way for the Big Ten and for Penn State. And as far as the recruiting goes, I'm not sure it changes a whole lot. And if you use the problem when you use one example, as I think perhaps our listener was doing with USC coming into Pennsylvania and getting Poly, is he not Samoan?
I don't want to comment specifically on, but yes, he is Polynesian, Pacific Island sort of heritage. Yes.
Okay. And for what it's worth, we know USC and the West Coast teams have more of a tradition of having those players. Now it's it's a geographic thing, the West Coast, but those are all factors that come into individual decisions. I hate making conclusions from one recruiting. It's like saying, as you pointed out, Ioane came from the Pacific Northwest. Don't conclude that Penn State now all of a sudden is going to be recruiting like crazy in the Pacific Northwest, basing that on one recruit. Yeah. All right, T. Frank, let's move on. Let's get back to our media day and some of James Franklin's comments from it. There were some other things that he talked about. It was kind of nice to hear him continuing on that path of depth. He talked about the depth on both lines, both the offensive line and the defensive line. That's got to make fans of the team pretty happy to hear that.
Yeah, and there is no change to the conversation that we've been having this offseason. It's all positive, but it is all a bit speculation. Now, they've gone through 3 practices, so there's a little bit more evidence, but I don't think that Franklin's comments are just because of those practices. I think it's just because of the way they've recruited the offensive line and the young players that they have. But again, if everyone stays healthy, this is the offensive line that they had in 2022. So the difference is going to be that the young players are pushing and that there's real competition, raising the level of everyone's play up front on the offensive line, especially talking about that group on the interior and then the defensive line. And the options you had at defensive tackle last year may have been a bit young. They may have been a bit immature in certain places, but those guys are older now and they have put in the work. It feels like everyone has put in the work this offseason to get themselves to where they need to be. I talked to Jordan Vandenberg for a couple of minutes on media day, and just standing next to him, he is massive. He is a huge human, and they've got a couple of those guys where before maybe they didn't. So, and for him especially, this is his 3rd year in playing defensive tackle, and he talked about how it just takes time. It just takes time through the process of getting better to get better. And you're not going to rush that process, because at a certain point, like, you can only get so much bigger in one day. You can only put so much work in the weight room in one day. Your brain can only process so much new information and make it habit in one day. So you just got to maximize each and every single day. And over the course of the last 3 years, essentially, he's been doing that at Penn State. So this is the year for him to make that move and to break out and to be a part of the 2 deep. So, certain guys are ahead of that, and they get things a bit quicker physically or mentally. And it seems like there's a good mix of guys at the defensive line. And then, of course, at defensive end, we already talked about how deep and talented that group is.
All right, T. Frank, let's talk about one of your favorite topics. Let's talk about kickers.
Oh, good.
James Franklin, in talking about several other positions, James Franklin used the adjective deep. Those positions were deep. Specialists, he said there was competition. So my question for you is, all right, are you glass half full or glass half empty? He had scholarship punter, scholarship kicker, and he chose through the portal to bring in another punter and another kicker. So what does that tell you?
The first thing it tells me is that I am pulling up the specialists so they get everyone's name right. Score touchdowns and kicks are less meaningful. That's where I'm going to start. And I know that that's a cop-out, but if you're going for a 53-yard field goal on 4th and 2 and not trying to get a first down and score 7, in the long term, you are setting yourself up to play too close of a game. So you do need a clutch kicker, and that's where the competition and trying to put those guys in that situation to get better, whether it's Felkins or Sanders Sahadak at the kicker position, to make those clutch field goals. I think timely field goals and consistency are the thing here. I don't know that superstar kicker is something that I think is necessary for a national championship, because, clutch kicking and timely kicking is incredibly important. But I don't want my team thinking, okay, we're at the 40, it's third down, like, it's fine, we'll settle for 3 because we know we have Justin Tucker. I don't want that. I want my team to be aggressive. If I'm building the personality of a team, I want them trying to score 7. From the punting position, the defense being very good, you want to be able to use those things and back teams up and put lots of pressure on an offense. But the defense is that good. So, a lot of this can be mitigated by, okay, we put our defense out there in a bad position, but they still shut the team down 3 and out and punt. I'm not giving you a great answer here, honestly, but it's just that it's a situation with the punting competition and the kicking competition. I don't know that I feel great about the punting competition, and the kicking competition. There's a lot of unknowns with the development of Sanders Sahadak, how it isn't going, I think, the way that you would want for a guy that I think was a 5-star from the kicking gurus. But I don't have the experience in doing special teams to tell you like what's going on, good or bad. And we're going to find out together. So yeah, it's not great, but at least they have options they feel good about. But ultimately you need one of each. And if there's not one guy that's rising to the top, then you do have a problem, kind of like quarterback.
And that is the thing that scares me is, did we feel like we needed to bring in transfer portal specialists because we weren't so confident in what we did have? Another interesting comment from James Franklin in the last minute we have here, T. Frank, is he went out of his way to praise the number 3 quarterback, Jackson Smolik, when we've all been talking about the competition between Drew Aller and Bo Prabula. He pointed out that there's another quarterback there doing well.
Yeah, you need 3 quarterbacks. You need 3 scholarship quarterbacks, and they're all young. But this goes back to what we've talked about when we talk about recruiting. They aren't recruiting guys that they hope to develop into quarterbacks. They are recruiting guys that have a mind for the position, and that in Jackson Smolik's case, watching him play in some playoff games and some clutch situations in high school, he's got a bit of a stone cold killer vibe about him. Like, I joked with him, I think, on our YouTube show one time, like, he's got that dead-eyed gunslinger sort of thing where he doesn't blink in the face of pressure. So when it comes to being on the field and making plays, he seems to adapt and evolve quickly. But as they pointed out, he needs to get smarter in the offense, which takes time, just like Jordan Vandenberg, a defensive tackle. It's just the quarterback has more information to process. But they recruit guys that have a mind and an application for the position where they're going to aggressively absorb that knowledge and then deploy it. And you just wonder with Jackson Smolik and Bo Prabula, they don't have the same physical talent as a Drew Aller, but they're better than people give them credit for because they're being compared to a guy that was a 5-star.
Very good, T. Frank. That's going to have to be the last word. Thank you all for listening. Make sure you join us next time on the Keystone Kickoff Show.